It's the Monday before Thanksgiving, 2014. In Culver City, California, thousands of Sony Pictures employees are settling in for what they expect to be a short week. A holiday is coming. People have travel plans, family dinners to think about, flights to catch. Then their computer screens go dark, and when they come back, they're not showing a desktop. They're showing a skull, a grinning red skeleton leering at them from thousands of monitors simultaneously across every floor of every Sony building. Beneath it, a message. We've obtained all your internal data, including your secrets and top secrets. Below the skull, a list of names, senior executives, and a warning: publish what we demand or everything gets released. Within hours, files began flooding the internet. Not just corporate memos, not just internal spreadsheets, entire unreleased films, the personal medical records of thousands of employees, social security numbers, salary data, and emails. Thousands and thousands of private emails between some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. The attackers called themselves the Guardians of Peace. And they were just getting started. Welcome to Dark Perimeter. I'm Cole Drayden. This is a show about the true stories behind the world's most significant cyber attacks, the hackers, the victims, the security failures, and the consequences that nobody saw coming. No guests, no panels, just the story. Today, Episode 1, Guardians of Peace. The 2014 hack of Sony Pictures Entertainment, a breach so complete, so destructive, and so politically explosive that it reshaped how the world thinks about cybersecurity, nation-state, aggression, and the power of information as a weapon. Let's go back to the beginning. Act 1. The movie that started a war. It started with a comedy. In the summer of 2014, Sony Pictures released the first trailer for a film called The Interview. Starring Seth Rogen and James Franco, it was a broad, irreverent action comedy about two bumbling American journalists who land an exclusive interview with North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un and get recruited by the CIA to assassinate him. By Hollywood standards, it was not exactly a prestige production. But North Korea did not see it that way. Within weeks of the trailer dropping, North Korea's UN ambassador formally complained to the United States government, calling the film, and I am not exaggerating here, an act of war. North Korean state media warned of merciless retaliation if the film was released. The country's foreign ministry called it the most blatant act of terrorism and war it had ever seen from America. Sony's own parent company in Japan was uneasy. Internal emails later revealed that Kazuo Hirai, the CEO of Sony Corporation, had screened the film and privately expressed serious concerns about its content. Verify. Exact nature of Hirai's communications. Reported in multiple outlets but based on leaked emails that Sony disputed. Sony Pictures pressed forward anyway, though they did quietly dial back the most graphic elements of Kim Jong-un's death scene. It would not be enough. Act 2, they were already inside. Here is something that gets lost in most retellings of the Sony hack. By the time those skulls appeared on employee screens on November 24th, the attackers had already been inside Sony's network for months. According to the FBI's investigation, the initial intrusion occurred as early as September 2014. Verify. Some reporting suggests even earlier access attempts in February 2014. The attackers moved quietly through Sony's systems, mapping the network, identifying the most sensitive data, staging files for exfiltration, all while Sony's security team had no idea they were there. This is a technique security professionals call dwell time, It's the gap between when attackers first get in and when they're detected, or in this case, when they choose to reveal themselves. The average dwell time across all major breaches is measured in months. The attackers at Sony used that time expertly. While inside, they deployed a piece of malware that security researchers would later call Destover. It was a sophisticated wiper, a program designed not to steal data and leave, but to destroy the systems it touched, to overwrite hard drives, to render computers unbootable. This wasn't a smash and grab, it was a demolition. By the time the skulls appeared on November 24th, the attackers had already exfiltrated an estimated 100 terabytes of data. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of roughly 50,000 hours of video, or the text content of about 10 million books. Everything Sony thought was private was gone. Act 3. The anatomy of the breach. Let's talk about how they actually got in, because this is where the story gets instructive. The exact initial access vector was never definitively confirmed in public reporting. Verify. The FBI and FireEye never fully disclosed the entry point publicly. What investigators and security researchers pieced together was a combination of spear phishing, targeted, convincing emails designed to trick specific employees into clicking malicious links or attachments, and the exploitation of credentials that gave the attackers a foothold inside the network. Once inside, the attackers didn't rush. They elevated their privileges slowly. They moved laterally from one system to another, using legitimate administrative tools that wouldn't trigger alarms. They found the crown jewels, the file servers containing unreleased films, the email servers, the HR systems holding employee personal data. And Sony's defenses did not stop them. Later analysis by cybersecurity firms painted a damaging picture of Sony's security posture at the time. Passwords were reportedly stored in plaintext files on network shares. Verify, widely reported, but Sony never officially confirmed specific details. Security monitoring was inadequate. Network segmentation, the practice of separating sensitive systems from general employee access, was insufficient. A determined, well-resourced attacker found the environment hospitable. This is not unusual. Most large organizations, if subjected to the same level of scrutiny, would find uncomfortable gaps. The difference at Sony was who was doing the looking. Act 4, 22 Days of Chaos. The skull screens appeared on Monday, November 24, 2014. What followed was 22 consecutive days of data dumps, threats, leaks, and escalating chaos. Within days of the initial breach going public, the Guardians of Peace began releasing files online, not all at once, but in waves. Strategically. Each release was calibrated to cause maximum embarrassment, maximum attention, maximum pressure. First came the unreleased films, 5 full movies, including the Brad Pitt World War II drama Fury and the Annie remake, appeared on piracy sites before their theatrical runs. Hundreds of thousands of downloads within hours. Then came the emails. If the film leaks were damaging to Sony's business, the emails were devastating to its people. Private correspondence between senior executives laid bare the unfiltered politics of one of the world's most powerful entertainment companies. Producer Scott Rudin, in an email exchange with Sony co-chair Amy Pascal, described actress Angelina Jolie using language that left little room for interpretation. In other emails, Pascal and Rudin made racially offensive jokes about President Barack Obama's presumed taste in films. Both later issued public apologies. Other leaks were less personal, but equally significant to the industry. emails revealed that Marvel had been quietly negotiating with Sony about bringing the Spider-Man character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. An early draft of the screenplay for the then unreleased James Bond film Spectre appeared online. The salaries of thousands of Sony employees, including senior executives, were published on public paste sites. And then there were the threats against individual employees. The Guardians of Peace began sending emails directly to Sony staff warning them to sign statements denouncing their employer or face personal harm. Families were mentioned. The FBI opened a separate investigation into the threat messages. Sony's CEO, Michael Linton, and co-chair Amy Pascal sent a company-wide message 10 days into the crisis. Its tone suggested an organization in shock. It is now apparent that a large amount of confidential Sony Pictures Entertainment data has been stolen by the attackers. That would prove to be something of an understatement. Act 5. The interview gets pulled. December 16, 2014. 3 weeks into the breach, the Guardians of Peace issued their most explicit threat yet. They called out the interview by name, and they referenced September 11th. The message warned that anyone who went to a theater screening the film would be remembered. The implication unmistakable. It was a threat of mass violence against American moviegoers. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security later assessed that there was no credible evidence of any actual plot to attack theaters. Verified DHS confirmed this publicly in December 2014. But the threat was enough. One by one, the major theater chains blinked. Regal Cinemas, AMC, Cinemark, Carmike. Each announced they would not screen the film. Faced with a wide release that had no screens to release to, Sony pulled the interview entirely on December 17th. The reaction was immediate and intense. President Obama, at his year-end press conference, said Sony had made a mistake. "We cannot have a society," he said, "in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States." He added that the United States would respond, proportionally at a time and place of its choosing. Hollywood was equally vocal. Directors, writers, and producers who had spent careers navigating sensitive material expressed alarm at the precedent being set. If a credible-sounding anonymous threat could pull a major studio release, what came next? Sony reversed course on December 23rd. The interview released to over 300 independent theaters and simultaneously on YouTube, Google Play, and other streaming platforms on Christmas Day, 2014. It performed surprisingly well digitally, and the Guardians of Peace went silent. Act 6. Who did this? Now we get to the part of the story that remains, even today, more complicated than the official narrative suggests. On December 19, 2014, the FBI formally attributed the attack to North Korea. The Bureau cited 3 main pillars. The malware used shared code and architecture with tools previously used by North Korean hackers against South Korean targets. The malware had been compiled on a Korean language system, and some of the IP addresses used in the attack had been previously associated with North Korean cyber operations. The U.S. government publicly blamed a specific unit within North Korea's intelligence apparatus, a group sometimes called Bureau 121, and linked by researchers to a broader threat actor known as the Lazarus Group, a name that would come up again and again in the years ahead. In 2018, the Department of Justice went further. They filed a criminal complaint naming a specific individual, a North Korean programmer named Park Jin-hyuk, as a key participant in the attack. The complaint ran 179 pages and connected Park to multiple operations attributed to North Korea. The official position is clear. North Korea did this. But the story has a few threads worth pulling. A cybersecurity firm called Norse, since defunct, conducted its own analysis and arrived at a different conclusion. Norse's investigators identified what they believed were 6 former Sony employees laid off during a company restructuring in May 2014, who had the access, the knowledge, and in some cases the publicly expressed anger to have facilitated the breach. Verify. Norse presented this to the FBI in December 2014. The FBI formally rejected their assessment after a 3-hour briefing. The FBI rejected Norse's findings, but the theory never entirely went away. Security researchers noted that the level of internal knowledge demonstrated by the attackers, knowing exactly where data was stored, which systems mattered, how the network was structured, suggested either very sophisticated reconnaissance or inside information. There were also reports, less widely covered, of Russian-speaking actors having access to Sony systems before and after the primary attack period. Verify. Reported in Hollywood Reporter's 2019 investigation. Disputed and unconfirmed by official sources. The honest answer, as a security professional, is this: attribution in cyberspace is genuinely hard. Nation-states and sophisticated actors deliberately use false flags, borrowed tools, and obfuscation. The FBI had access to classified intelligence the public will never see. They may be entirely right. But the case was never as airtight as the official statements implied. What is not disputed: someone with enormous capability and either deep insider knowledge or extensive reconnaissance burned Sony Pictures to the ground. Whether that was North Korea acting alone, North Korea with inside help, or something else entirely. The damage was real, and the lessons were permanent. Act 7. The aftermath. Let's talk about what this cost. In its first quarter, financials for 2015, Sony set aside $15 million to address direct damages from the breach. That number almost certainly understates the full cost when you factor in legal fees, employee identity monitoring services, the cost of rebuilding destroyed infrastructure, reputational damage, and the ongoing legal proceedings. Sony co-chair Amy Pascal stepped down in February 2015. Her departure was framed as a transition to a production role, but the leaked emails had made her position untenable. Scott Rudin quietly retreated from the public statements he'd made in those emails. Both had their reputations damaged in ways that a press release cannot fully repair. For the employees caught in the middle, the thousands of people whose social security numbers, medical records, salary information, and personal details ended up on the public internet, the damage was more personal and longer-lasting. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed by former employees arguing Sony had failed in its duty to protect their information. Some of those cases took years to resolve. The broader security industry took notice in a very specific way. Before Sony, wiper malware, destructive software designed to permanently destroy data rather than encrypt it for ransom, was considered a niche, nation-state level concern. After Sony, it was on every CISO's threat model. The idea that an attacker's goal might not be money, but pure destruction, forced a rethinking of incident response planning across the industry. And the geopolitical implications were significant. Sony was the first time the United States government publicly and formally accused a nation-state of conducting a destructive cyber attack against an American company. It set a precedent for how governments respond to cyber aggression. and how they name and shame adversaries in this new domain of conflict. Act 8. What we can learn. I want to end every episode of this show with what the story actually teaches us, not a lecture, just the signal in the noise. The first lesson is about dwell time. The attackers were inside Sony's network for months before they detonated. Sony had no idea. This is not unusual. It is, in fact, the norm in sophisticated breaches. Detection capabilities matter as much as prevention. You will not stop every attacker from getting in. The question is how long they stay before you find them. The second lesson is about the value of your data. Sony didn't lose money in a traditional sense. They lost information, emails, films, HR records, personal data. None of it had a dollar figure attached to it sitting on a file server. All of it became extraordinarily costly the moment it was in the wrong hands. Data has value proportional to how badly someone else doesn't want you to have it, or how badly you don't want them to. The third lesson is about nation-state threat actors. Most organizations, even large ones, build their security programs against cybercriminals. Opportunistic attackers chasing money. Sony was targeted by what the FBI assessed as a nation-state with a political objective and essentially unlimited patience. Those are different adversaries. They require different thinking. And the fourth lesson is the one nobody likes to say out loud. Physical threats work. The technical breach was devastating, but it was an anonymous message referencing 9/11 that actually pulled the film. No bomb, no attack, just words in an email, and the combination of a terrified corporate entity and theater chains unwilling to accept liability was enough to accomplish what the breach alone could not. Security is not just a technical problem. It never has been. It is a human problem dressed in technical clothing. The Sony hack is now over 10 years old. Park Jin-hyuk has never been extradited. North Korea continues to deny any involvement. The Lazarus Group, the threat actor most researchers associate with Bureau 121, went on to conduct dozens of operations around the world, including the 2017 WannaCry ransomware attack that hit hospitals, banks, and governments across 150 countries. Amy Pascal went on to produce several successful films, including Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse. Scott Rudin stepped back from Broadway productions in 2021 amid separate allegations of workplace misconduct. The interview is available on streaming. It has a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes. Sony Pictures rebuilt its security infrastructure and has not experienced a comparable breach since. The skulls are gone from the screens. But the story they announced, that a movie, a nation's wounded pride, and a corporation's inadequate defenses could combine to create an international crisis. That story isn't over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in how power gets projected in the digital age. I'm Cole Drayden. This is Dark Perimeter. If you found this story worth your time, tell someone about it. And if you work in security and want to suggest a case worth covering, you know where to find me. We'll see you inside the perimeter,